Good morning, YouTube. This is Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. It's mid-April, and the effects of coronavirus have set in a lot. We're in a couple of weeks of lockdown, probably months at this point. I can't not even keeping track. A month and a half, I guess. And things seem to have plateaued, and they're going to make their way down, and people starting to wonder what's going to happen with the end of school year, what's going to happen at the beginning of the next year. And within that planning, my mind is always going. So I'm also thinking about um, issues with the SHSAT. Some of the if it's history, I think could be helped by having a PSHSAT. So first of all, kind of what the heck am I talking about? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Why am I even thinking of this? Thinking this because I think it is a time of change right now. Budgets are going to change. We don't even know if remote schooling is going to end in September. We don't even know what's happening with summer school yet, and it's still mid-April. So there's a lot of change going on, and sometimes change is good. We might want to resist it and so on, but lots of good things happen too as well. And I think this is a time for opportunities to avail themselves as well. And you always have to be forward thinking, because if not September, there's always the next year, and so on and so on. So what am I thinking? I'm thinking what I should be thinking, I think. Um, so with that in mind, let's kind of explore this topic of the possibility of a PSHSAT. Well, first of all, the PSST is the preliminary SAT, and everybody knows about the SAT as well. Well, it turns out the SAT has been around for decades, um, and it's normally for kids in older grades. But there's also the PSAT, and it's actually been around for something like 60 years. Um, I'm pretty sure it formally was established in 1959, and there was even a test before that called the qualifying exam or something like that. I really don't know all the history of it, but we're talking decades and decades and decades and decades, even older than me, right? So 60 years is a long time to have a test like this. I'm not even talking about the SAT, I'm talking about the PSAT. So this is something that's been around for years, and millions and millions and millions and millions of students have taken this, including just last year, right? And if I'm not mistaken, more kids take the PSAT than they do in the SAT. So that's a lot of kids. Okay, so first of all, this is something the College Board established and administered, and I want to use this as a parallel into what I'm talking about. So let's be clear too. There's a few PSATs. Normally they're shorter in length and have less questions than the SAT. So it basically starts out in grade 8 and 9. You have a max score of 1440. It's about 3 hours long, and there's about 40 questions in each section: reading, writing, and math. And the PSAT 10, which you can take 1 or 2 years later if you want, the max score bumps up to 1520. It's also about 3 hours. It also has a reading, writing, and math. But if you notice, there's 5 more reading questions, 4 more writing questions, and 10 more math questions. By the writing, I don't necessarily mean writing an essay or something, but in revising and editing, and in knowing the how to write structurally with grammar and things like that, or whether there's questions based on that. Okay, so language conventions and things like that. Then finally, by the time normally when the student is expected to be around a junior, there's also the PSAT Nmsqt, which is actually the same for the most part as the PSAT 10. There's one difference, is that it allows for scholarships. So if you want a scholarship for entry into college, or I think there's other artifacts of that come about through that, you would take the PSAT Nmsqt. And if you can get your score is reasonable enough, or depending on what the criteria of the scholarship giver is looking for, you can get a scholarship. And then obviously there's your SAT, which you'd also take as a high school student, because you're trying to use this for entry into college. It bumps up this max score to 1600. It's literally 3 hours now. And if you notice, there's another 5 questions in reading, and another 10 questions in math. So they're turning the screws, so to speak. So there's this incremental iterative process going on from the PSE 8 all the way to the SAT itself. Okay, so the benefits of the PSAT is it just starts to give you a head start. An SAT is one of the so-called rites of passage into getting into a college, and some schools don't require it, and with the coronavirus, less are requiring it, at least for this school year. Things like the SAT and all standardized tests, they're always controversial, but they are one pathway into getting accepted into college. Um, so there's issues like that. It also provides a roadmap for you if you're taking the PSAT into, well, what do I know and not know? And this is going to go on through your years, because obviously if you're going to take Algebra 2 as a junior or a sophomore or whatever, you may not know that algebra, but it's giving you a heads up for what's going on here, and that's important. And within that process, you can keep track of what's going on. And you can also get teacher feedback on that. And it's one way for you to know what you have to work on, because even if you don't know Algebra 2 yet, you at least know, well, that's the kind of questions I need to strive for, to excel for. And again, it's this iterative, incremental process. By the way, it's, in addition to the possibility of getting a scholarship when you take the Nmsqt version, um, some schools also use it a glimpse into what AP classes you're allowed to take. There's actually a way to feed in your AP scores into something on the College Board site, and it'll give you an estimate of the likelihood of being accepted into a given AP course. Again, people may say, well, that's not a guarantee. That's meaningless information. They've done correlations and they figured some things out. So it's not a guarantee. It's just the data point, but it's still a data point nonetheless. Okay, so there's the benefit of that as well. And as I said, there's the scholarships, and obviously the preliminary SAT is your ricochet point into the SAT itself. So it's all intended not only for prep for what's going on as you iterate and increment and progress in your success along in high school, but it's also going to there into the effort of eventually taking the SAT at some point. Okay, so with that in mind, what is the issue coming back to the SAT? Why would there be a need for a preliminary SAT? Well, a lot of kids, I think, will get super surprised when they take the SAT, even the ones that prep for it. They're not realizing how complicated and complex it really is, even if they're starting to get the answers right, and even if in their prep they're getting reasonable cutoff scores. I think people don't know how grading really works. I think they don't realize that this is young kids taking a test, and there's nothing like being there on test day, no matter how many practice tests you took, no matter how rigorous you prepared, no matter how well you studied. There's nothing like being there on test day. And establishing something like a PSHSAT can hit all these things I just talked about, an iterative incremental process, giving a heads up, and just getting familiar with what's going on. And if you backed up and knew your strengths and weaknesses, you have a path, a roadmap laying out before you of how to increment along through your SAT work. Okay, so this is kind of a no-brainer in certain ways, that this makes sense. And again, the fact that the PSAT existed for 60 years, this is not just a money play for the SAT and the College Board. A lot of people say it's just a whole money play. They're for a profit, even though they say they're not for profit and all this other stuff. Yes, I think there are artifacts of that here. But in our case, since the SHSAT is given by the state, the government, the New York City, right? There's other issues in there. So we already have the SAT 8 for incoming grade 9 students and the SHSAT 9 for incoming grade 10 students. I say we add the PSHSAT 7, 6, and 5. And it basically will give students a roadmap through their whole middle school years. And if we tie it back to some other things where the SHSAT is required, and we have an SHSAT day, where there's a day that all students take the SHSAT in New York City, then this will become a rite of passage, so to speak, that same day that students take the actual SHSAT, they can also take maybe the PSHSAT in grade 7. So this becomes a day, it becomes something they're used to. And that's one of my points here. So what we have is, this is not about prepping for the SHSAT indefinitely either. I'm talking about strictly an incremental, iterative process. Okay, a lot of students over-prepare for the SHSAT, and they don't know they're doing it, especially people who pay for it. There's an argument that only wealthy families do prep. That actually is not true. That's false. Um, but there's a lot of money being spent on prep that doesn't need to be. And I'm a tutor, so I'm all for students who need tutoring being able to get it, but it's not about just wearing yourself to exhaustion by doing problem after problem after problem after problem. So it's about progressing into your studying and your prep with doing it smartly. Okay, the smart ways to do this. And if you do it based on your strengths and weaknesses and other issues, including knowing about test taking skills and so on, once you know the subject material, the rest will start kicking into place. And if this starts just through an incremental iterative process, starting in grade 5 even maybe, but certain through 6, 7, 8 through your middle school years, there's enough basis here that maybe this could even be a class for every student to take. And there's enough issues here where there's enough clubs and sports teams and after school things that maybe this can also be one of the classes added on, especially when we talk about things about inequity. And by the way, once something like this happens, the notion of super testing and super scoring can be added on here, especially if my other suggestions are taken that maybe this test should move into being online and or modified in various ways against how its current form. There's ways the SHSAT can be enhanced, and I think if all those things happen in unison, we may actually have a better, prettier picture here. Now, in relation to inequity, how could this address inequity? What am I talking about again? Well, there's a lot of issues that happen. For instance, like a lot of families, especially students of color and poor families and stuff like that, disenfranchised in certain ways. They claim they didn't even know that the SHSAT existed. Their school didn't inform them of that. They have horrible guidance counselors apparently in a lot of schools. But if SAT day became part of our academic landscape, and if there was a PSHSAT 7, 6, and 5, it would force the guidance counselors to do this. There's also other issues related to that a family that's disenfranchised often has an issue of the student taking the test on a Saturday or a Sunday. Okay, it may even come down to not even having a Metro card to be able to do it. So if there was a PSAT, a SHSAT day given in school, including a PSSAT day, then all these things, as a domino effect, they all get addressed simultaneously. So I think we can come here. And on the notion of things like scholarships, there's no reason why there can't be some benefit to a PSHSAT involving something analogous to the Nmsqt effect where a child is given a scholarship. Now you might say, well, what's the point of the scholarship if they're in middle school and they're going to be entering a free high school? Well, maybe there's other benefits can happen. Buying their books, giving them a savings bond. I'm not talking about tens of thousands of dollars are necessary. It could also be establishing something at their school in their honor. As more children are able to get reasonable cutoff scores, maybe the Department of Education or even New York State or even private funding can add on up here. By private funding is a pivotal key here. There have been some people with private funding requesting that there be an SHSAT day. There are people with private funding saying they will offer free tutoring for certain students if the mayor let some of these things go happen. By the way, the mayor and the chancellor rejected these things. So that's not good. That's a bad idea, especially when private funding is allowed. So I offer this in that bubble, in that whole notion of a and a SHSAT day, including lower grades now, so that becomes normally part of our academic landscape, so nobody can say they don't know about it, and it also gives children who don't have an opportunity right now the opportunity to be able to rank up. So when they finally get to the real SHSAT, or the SHSAT that actually gets them into a specialized high school, they're there finally. They've been able to go through that path. And there may also be summer school offerings based on this as well. There are certain programs already that have aspects of this, but they have certain problems with them. And I think if we formally had a PSHSAT at certain levels, I think it would give us the thumbs up and the motivation and the actual vision to move forward on stuff like this. Okay. Also, it can be used for screening schools, like Beacon and Bard already have a test already. So maybe that could be the PSHSAT 7. Okay. Or maybe those schools should start using the SHSAT themselves. There's too much redundant effort going on there. There's money being wasted. Not only does it mean a school like Beacon has their own test, and then there's the SHSAT, but Bard and so on has their own test too. Those should all be probably merged together. And I'm not trying to say every school is the same. In fact, I believe the SHSAT doesn't even apply to all the schools equally, because most specialized high schools are science and technology and math based. But there's other schools like Lehman and Brooklyn Latin that aren't necessarily science and math based, but they're literacy based and literature based and liberal arts based. And there's this yin yang always going on, which ties back into my point here. Where is my point? I have another point somewhere. So about the super scoring, and super scoring is something the SAT uses, which is that if you take multiple SATs, you can be able to take your top math score and your top English score, and I also believe it should happen at the point where you should just be able to go in and not have to take the whole SAT again. Just retake the math part and just retake the English part. Especially all of this is online. It's kind of silly if that's not the case. So I think when we get back to screen schools or schools with themes, we can start having themed things underneath it, which will apply to it. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to put this to rest. I want to say something though. I tutor a lot of kids, and I have to often put on a lot of hats. So as much as I'm there to maybe tutor a kid in math, tutor a kid in English, tutor a kid to pass to get a great score in the SHSAT, enhance their test taking skills, I'm not just there for that. I like to think I'm there to give kids different ideas about how to think. Different kids give kids different ideas of how to approach problems. I'm also there to act as their medical doctor in case there's issues, learning issues that the family may not be aware of. I'm also there as their therapist. I need to have a confident child, a calm child, a child who's believes in themselves and is not there getting punished by their parents and other things like that. So as much as I'm there to tutor math and English, for instance, that's not the only thing I do. And that's, I think, in this whole can of worms I'm talking about here. I think that's another premise and reason for the PSSAT to do. And I'm really super on this incremental and iterative process. So with that note, I'm going to leave you guys. Happy studying. What do you think about what I'm talking about? Please leave a comment below. Like and subscribe as well. Hit the notification button. I do a lot of streams now for a couple of years. And, you know, let's just chill out together. Most of my streams are live streams, so if you want to join in and ask questions, please feel free to do so. Meantime, peace out. And if you need to email me, don't hesitate. Everybody have a nice day.